The first rays of sunlight crept through the heavy silk curtains of Kensington Palace as Prince William opened his eyes on what would become one of the most important days in British royal history. The golden light painted soft patterns across the ornate ceiling of his bedroom, while the future king lay still for a moment, feeling the weight of anticipation settle in his chest like a gentle but persistent drumbeat. Today was his father's coronation day. Today, Charles would become King Charles II, and William would move one step closer to his own destiny as the future monarch of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. He rolled over and glanced at the antique clock on his bedside table. 6:30 in the morning. The ceremony would not begin for several hours, but already he could hear the distant sounds of preparation echoing through the palace corridors. Staff members were moving about with quiet efficiency, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets as they attended to last-minute details that would ensure everything proceeded perfectly. William sat up slowly and ran his hands through his hair, trying to shake off the strange mixture of excitement and nervousness that had kept him tossing and turning for much of the night. He had attended countless royal ceremonies throughout his life, but this felt different. This was history in the making, and he would not just be watching from the sidelines. He would be playing a central role in a tradition that stretched back over 1,000 years. The bathroom door opened softly, and Catherine emerged, already dressed in a simple silk robe, her hair loosely pinned up. Even in the early morning light, without makeup or formal attire, she possessed a natural elegance that never failed to amaze him. She had been awake for some time, he realized, probably unable to sleep just as he had been. "Good morning," she said quietly, her voice carrying just the slightest trace of the same nervous energy he felt. "Are you ready for today?" William stood and walked over to her, taking her hands in his. "As ready as anyone can be for something like this," he replied with a gentle smile. "How are you feeling about everything?" Catherine squeezed his hands reassuringly. "I keep thinking about how proud your mother would have been to see this day," she said softly. "She would have been so happy to watch your father finally receive the crown he has waited for his entire life." The mention of his mother, Princess Diana, brought a familiar tightness to William's throat. It was true that she would have been overjoyed to witness this historic moment. He could almost imagine her excitement, the way her eyes would have sparkled with pride and happiness as she watched her former husband take his place as king. "She would have been especially proud of you," Catherine continued, her voice filled with warmth. "The way you have supported your father through everything, the dignity you bring to your role as the Prince of Wales." William pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume. Together, they stood in comfortable silence for a few moments, drawing strength from each other as they had learned to do throughout their years of marriage and royal duty. A soft knock at the bedroom door interrupted their quiet moment. "Come in," William called out. Their private secretary entered, carrying a silver tray with tea and light breakfast items. "Good morning, Your Royal Highnesses," he said with a respectful bow. "I thought you might appreciate something to eat before the day becomes too hectic." "Thank you, James," Catherine replied graciously. "That was very thoughtful of you." The secretary set the tray down on a small table near the window and then turned back to them. "The cars will be ready in 2 hours, and the final briefing with the protocol team is scheduled for 9 o'clock. Everything is proceeding according to schedule." "Excellent," William said. "And the children?" "Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis are all awake and having breakfast with their nanny. They are quite excited about today, though young Louis did ask if he would be allowed to wear his toy crown to the ceremony." Catherine laughed softly at this news. "We will have to explain to him that there are rules about royal crowns, even toy ones." After the secretary left, William and Catherine shared their simple breakfast by the window, watching as the grounds of Kensington Palace slowly came to life. Gardeners were making final touches to the flower beds, security personnel were conducting their morning checks, and in the distance, they could see the first news crews setting up their equipment along the route that would soon carry them to Westminster Abbey. "This is really happening," William said quietly, more to himself than to Catherine. "Yes," she replied, placing her hand over his, "and we will face it together, just as we always have." The palace corridors buzzed with controlled energy as Catherine made her way to her private dressing chambers. Her silk robe whispered against the polished marble floors while she walked past portraits of former queens and princesses who had once prepared for their own grand occasions in these same rooms. The weight of history seemed to follow her every step, reminding her that she was about to become part of a story that would be told for generations. Her lady-in-waiting, Sarah, was already waiting in the dressing room along with a carefully selected team of stylists and designers. The room itself was a masterpiece of elegance, with tall windows that let in streams of golden morning light. Mirrors lined one wall, reflecting the organized chaos of gowns, jewelry boxes, and beauty supplies that had been arranged with military precision. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Sarah greeted her with a warm smile. "Everything is ready for your preparation." Catherine nodded gratefully and settled into the comfortable chair positioned in front of the main mirror. As she looked at her reflection, she thought about the millions of people around the world who would be watching her today. The thought was both thrilling and slightly overwhelming. The dress chosen for this historic day hung on a special frame nearby, protected by delicate tissue paper. It was a creation of breathtaking beauty, designed by one of Britain's most talented fashion artists. The ivory silk fabric seemed to glow in the morning light, while thousands of tiny crystals and pearls had been hand-sewn into intricate patterns that would catch every camera flash and ray of sunlight. But it was not just the dress that would make Catherine shine today. Resting in a velvet-lined case on a nearby table was a headpiece that held special meaning for both her and William. It had once belonged to Princess Diana, William's beloved mother, and wearing it today would be Catherine's way of honoring the woman who had captured the hearts of people everywhere. The hairstylist began working on Catherine's hair with gentle, practiced movements. Each strand was positioned with care, creating an elegant style that would complement both the precious headpiece and the formal nature of the occasion. Catherine closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart as she felt the transformation beginning. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Prince William was having his own preparations. His military uniform hung ready on its stand, the deep blue fabric adorned with golden braiding and gleaming medals that represented years of service and dedication. Each medal told a story. Each ribbon carried meaning that connected him to the long line of royals who had served their country with honor. William's valet helped him into the uniform piece by piece, ensuring that every button was perfectly aligned and every crease was sharp. The Prince of Wales looked at himself in the mirror and saw not just a man getting dressed for an important event, but the future King of England preparing to witness his father's coronation. Back in Catherine's dressing room, the makeup artist was applying subtle touches that would photograph beautifully under the bright lights of Westminster Abbey. Catherine had always preferred a natural look, and today would be no exception. Her beauty would shine through without heavy cosmetics, allowing her genuine emotions to show clearly to everyone watching. As the morning progressed, both William and Catherine could hear the sounds of London waking up to this historic day. Through the palace windows, they could see crowds beginning to gather along the processional route. People had traveled from all corners of the world to witness this moment, many camping out overnight to secure the best viewing spots. The children were being prepared in their own rooms, with Prince George receiving special attention, since he would have an important role in the ceremony. Charlotte and Louis were excited, but also a bit nervous about the long day ahead. Their nanny made sure they understood how important it was to behave properly during the ceremony. Palace staff moved through the halls with quiet efficiency, checking and double-checking every detail. Security teams conducted their final sweeps while communication specialists tested their equipment one last time. Every person in the palace understood that they were part of something extraordinary. Catherine stood up from her chair and looked at herself in the full-length mirror. The transformation was nearly complete, and she could hardly believe the elegant figure looking back at her. In just a few hours, she would be walking into Westminster Abbey as the Princess of Wales, ready to witness history being made and to play her own part in the continuing story of the British royal family. The transformation of Catherine, into the epitome of royal elegance, continued as the morning sun climbed higher in the London sky. Her hairstylist worked with the precision of a master craftsman, ensuring that every curl would hold perfectly throughout the long ceremony ahead. The style was both classic and modern, designed to showcase the precious headpiece that would soon crown her dark hair. The headpiece itself sat waiting in its special case, catching the light like captured starlight. It had been carefully cleaned and adjusted by palace jewelers, who understood the emotional significance of this particular piece. When Princess Diana had worn it years ago, photographers had captured images that became iconic around the world. Now Catherine would carry forward that legacy, creating new memories while honoring the past. Sarah, her lady-in-waiting, carefully lifted the headpiece from its velvet cushion. The weight of it was surprising, not just from the precious metals and gems, but from the history it carried. As it was placed gently on Catherine's head, she felt a connection to William's mother that brought tears to her eyes. "You look absolutely radiant, Your Royal Highness," Sarah whispered, stepping back to admire the result. Catherine turned her head slowly, watching how the light danced across the diamonds and pearls. She thought about Diana, wondering what advice the beloved princess might have given her on this momentous day. The thought brought both comfort and a sense of responsibility that settled gently on her shoulders. Down the hall, Prince William was experiencing his own moments of reflection as his valet made final adjustments to his uniform. The metal ribbons across his chest told the story of his military service, each one earned through dedication and sacrifice. Today, they would also represent the continuity of royal duty that stretched back through centuries of British history. William picked up his phone and dialed his father's private number. The call was answered immediately, and he could hear the nervous excitement in King Charles's voice, even before any words were spoken. "How are you feeling, Papa?" William asked, using the childhood name that still felt natural between them. "Nervous, proud, overwhelmed," Charles replied with characteristic honesty. "I keep thinking about your grandmother, how she guided me through so many years of preparation for this moment. She would be incredibly proud of you today," William said softly. "You have waited for this with such patience and grace." After ending the call, William felt a renewed sense of purpose. Today was not just about ceremony and tradition. It was about the continuation of service that had defined his family for generations. In the children's wing of the palace, Prince George was receiving his own special preparation. At 10 years old, he understood better than his younger siblings the importance of the day. His nanny helped him into his formal suit while explaining once again the role he would play in the ceremony. George looked at himself in the mirror and tried to imagine what it would feel like when his own turn came, many years in the future. The thought was both exciting and a little frightening, but seeing his parents handle their responsibilities with such dignity gave him confidence. Princess Charlotte was having her hair styled in the next room, chattering happily about all the beautiful dresses she would see today. At 8 years old, she was old enough to appreciate the pageantry, but young enough to find pure joy in the spectacle. Little Prince Louis, at 5 years old, was more interested in whether there would be cake after the ceremony. His nanny patiently explained that there would indeed be a celebration, but first everyone had to sit very quietly during the long service at the abbey. Back in Catherine's dressing room, the final touches were being applied. Her makeup artist stepped back to admire her work, knowing that this face would be seen by millions of people around the world. The look was timeless yet fresh, allowing Catherine's natural beauty to shine through, while ensuring she would photograph perfectly under any lighting conditions. The dress was carefully lifted from its frame, and Catherine stepped into it with the help of 3 assistants. The silk felt cool against her skin as it settled around her, the weight of the fabric giving her a sense of the grandeur that awaited. As the final button was fastened, she truly became the Princess of Wales, ready to represent the monarchy with grace and dignity. The sound of horse hooves on cobblestones echoed through the palace courtyard as the magnificent state carriages arrived in perfect formation. These were not ordinary vehicles, but masterpieces of craftsmanship that had carried royalty for generations. The horses, specially trained for such occasions, stood proudly in their ceremonial harnesses, their coats gleaming like polished bronze in the morning sunlight. Prince William emerged from the palace first, his military uniform creating a striking figure against the ancient stone walls. Every medal on his chest caught the light, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the courtyard. He paused for a moment, taking in the scene before him. This was the moment when their private preparations would become public spectacle, when the intimate family occasion would transform into a global event. Catherine appeared at the palace entrance, and the entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Her gown flowed behind her like liquid silk, each crystal and pearl woven into the fabric catching the sunlight and creating an almost magical glow around her figure. The headpiece that had once graced Princess Diana now crowned Catherine's head with equal elegance, making her look every inch the future queen she was destined to become. William extended his arm to help her into the carriage, their movements synchronized from years of public appearances together. As Catherine settled into the plush velvet seats, her dress arranged itself in perfect folds around her, creating a picture that photographers would treasure for decades to come. The carriage door closed with a soft click, and suddenly they were no longer just William and Catherine preparing for an important day. They had become their Royal Highnesses, the Prince and Princess of Wales, ready to play their part in one of the most significant ceremonies in British history. The horses began to move, their hooves creating a steady rhythm on the palace drive. Through the carriage windows, William and Catherine could see palace staff lining the route, all of them dressed in their finest uniforms and waving respectfully as the royal procession passed by. As they turned onto the main street, the real magnitude of the day became clear. Thousands upon thousands of people lined both sides of the road, many of them having waited since the early hours of the morning to catch a glimpse of the royal family. British flags fluttered in the gentle breeze, while voices rose in cheers that seemed to shake the very buildings around them. Catherine lifted her hand in the graceful wave she had perfected over years of royal duties. Her smile was genuine and warm, reflecting the joy she felt at seeing so many people come together to celebrate this historic moment. Children sat on their father's shoulders, elderly people in wheelchairs were positioned at the front of crowds, and visitors from around the world held up phones and cameras to capture memories they would treasure forever. William watched his wife's interaction with the crowds and felt a surge of pride. She had transformed from a university student into a true princess, someone who understood instinctively how to connect with people from all walks of life. Her ability to make each person in the crowd feel seen and acknowledged was a gift that could not be taught. The carriage carrying their children followed close behind, and the cheers grew even louder when people spotted Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. The young royals waved enthusiastically, their excitement infectious as it spread through the crowds lining the streets. George, dressed in his formal suit, maintained the serious expression appropriate for his future role while still managing to acknowledge the well-wishers. Charlotte beamed with delight at all the attention, her natural charm winning hearts wherever she looked. Little Louis seemed amazed by the sheer number of people, his eyes wide with wonder at the spectacle surrounding him. As the procession made its way through London's historic streets, Catherine and William passed landmarks that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies. They rode past Buckingham Palace, where crowds had gathered on the steps and pressed against the famous gates. They traveled down the Mall, that grand avenue designed specifically for royal processions, where the tree-lined route created a natural cathedral of green leading toward Westminster. Each turn in their journey brought new crowds and fresh waves of enthusiasm. Catherine noticed elderly women dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs, clearly moved by the emotion of the moment. She saw young girls dressed in their finest clothes, many wearing plastic tiaras in tribute to the royal occasion. The carriage moved at the perfect pace, slow enough for everyone to see the royal couple clearly but steady enough to maintain the dignity of the procession. William and Catherine had practiced this balance many times, understanding that their public appearances were performances that brought joy to millions of people around the world. As Westminster Abbey came into view, its ancient towers rising against the blue sky, Both William and Catherine felt their hearts beat faster. This was where the real ceremony would take place, where they would witness history being made as Charles officially became King Charles II. The crowds around the abbey were the densest yet, with people packed into every available space. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation as the royal carriage approached the final destination of this magnificent journey through the heart of London. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey seemed to glow with anticipation as the royal carriage drew to a perfect stop at the entrance. The building that had witnessed nearly 1,000 years of coronations stood ready for another historic moment, its Gothic towers reaching toward heaven like prayers made of stone and mortar. Catherine felt her breath catch in her throat as she looked up at the magnificent facade of the abbey. Through those doors, kings and queens had walked for centuries, each carrying the hopes and dreams of their nation. Today, she would join that illustrious procession, not as a monarch, but as a witness to the making of one. Prince William stepped out of the carriage first, his movements careful and deliberate as cameras from around the world captured every second. He turned to help Catherine, extending his hand with the same gentle courtesy he had shown her since their university days together. The moment her silk slipper touched the red carpet that had been rolled out for the occasion, a collective gasp rose from the assembled crowd. Catherine's appearance was nothing short of breathtaking. The morning light seemed to dance across her gown, making every crystal and pearl shimmer like captured starlight. The headpiece that had once belonged to Princess Diana caught the sun's rays and threw them back in brilliant flashes that made her look almost ethereal. She paused for just a moment, allowing the photographers to capture the image that would grace newspaper front pages around the world. Her smile was radiant but composed, showing both the joy she felt and the dignity required for such a solemn occasion. The train of her dress flowed behind her in perfect waves, attended to by ladies-in-waiting who had rehearsed this moment countless times. The couple walked slowly toward the abbey's great doors, their pace measured to match the gravity of the moment. With each step, they moved deeper into history, joining the countless royal figures who had made this same journey before them. The crowd's cheers seemed to echo off the ancient walls, creating a symphony of celebration that filled the morning air. Inside the abbey, 2,000 of the world's most distinguished guests had risen to their feet. Presidents and prime ministers, celebrities and religious leaders, members of the extended royal family and representatives from every corner of the Commonwealth, all stood in respectful silence as they waited for the royal family's entrance. The guest list read like a who's who of global influence and importance. Foreign royalty sat alongside elected officials, while cultural icons shared pews with military leaders. Despite their diverse backgrounds and nationalities, they were all united in this moment by their presence at one of the most significant ceremonies in recent history. Catherine and William paused at the threshold of the abbey, the boundary between the public street and the sacred space where the coronation would take place. For a brief moment, they were suspended between two worlds, the cheering crowds behind them and the solemn ceremony ahead. Their children joined them at the entrance, creating a picture of royal family unity that would be remembered for generations. Prince George stood tall beside his father, his young face serious with the understanding of his important role. Princess Charlotte held her mother's hand, her excitement barely contained despite the formal nature of the occasion. Little Prince Louis looked around with wide eyes, amazed by the grandeur surrounding him. Together, the family of five represented both the present and the future of the British monarchy. They embodied the continuation of traditions that stretched back through centuries, while also symbolizing the modern, accessible royal family that had evolved to meet the needs of the 21st century. The Archbishop of Canterbury waited inside, dressed in his ceremonial robes and ready to perform the sacred duty that would transform Charles from prince to king. The ancient coronation chair sat nearby, its wooden frame worn smooth by age, but still strong enough to support the weight of history that would soon rest upon it. The abbey's famous organ began to play, its magnificent notes filling the vast space with music that seemed to come from heaven itself. The sound wrapped around the assembled guests like a warm embrace, preparing their hearts for the sacred ceremony they were about to witness. Catherine took one last look at the crowds gathered outside, her heart filled with gratitude for the support and love she saw in their faces. These were the people she and William served, the citizens whose hopes and dreams they carried with them into their royal duties. As the great doors of Westminster Abbey opened wide to receive them, Catherine and William stepped forward into their destiny. Behind them lay their private preparations and quiet moments of reflection. Ahead waited the ceremony that would crown a new king and forever change the course of British history. The ancient stones of the Abbey seemed to whisper welcome as the royal family crossed the threshold, ready to play their part in a tradition that connected them to saints and scholars, warriors and poets, all the great figures who had helped shape the nation they now served with such dedication and grace. The moment Catherine and William stepped inside Westminster Abbey, they entered a world transformed by centuries of tradition and reverence. The ancient building seemed to breathe with history, its stone walls having witnessed the coronations of monarchs whose names were woven into the very fabric of British identity. The air itself felt different inside the sacred space, heavy with the weight of ceremony and brightened by the hope of new beginnings. 2,000 pairs of eyes turned toward them as they began their slow procession down the nave. The Abbey's central aisle stretched before them like a pathway through time, leading from the present moment toward the altar where history would be made. Every step they took was measured and purposeful, choreographed to perfection, yet filled with genuine emotion. Catherine's movement was poetry in motion. Her gown flowed around her with each step, the silk catching the colored light that streamed through the Abbey's magnificent stained glass windows. The train behind her moved like a river of ivory and crystal, tended by her ladies-in-waiting who glided along beside her with practiced grace. The headpiece that crowned her dark hair caught fragments of rainbow light from the windows, creating a halo effect that made her appear almost angelic. Prince William walked beside his wife with military precision, his uniform a striking contrast to her flowing elegance. The medals on his chest told stories of service and dedication, while his bearing spoke of a man ready to accept the responsibilities that destiny had placed upon his shoulders. Together, they represented the perfect balance of strength and grace that had come to define the modern British monarchy. The guests who filled every pew were witnessing something extraordinary. Presidents leaned forward in their seats to get a better view, while movie stars forgot their usual composure and gazed in wonder at the spectacle before them. Children of other royal families watched with wide eyes, perhaps imagining their own future ceremonies, while elderly dignitaries dabbed at tears that spoke of their recognition of this historic moment. The Abbey's choir began to sing, their voices rising toward the vaulted ceiling in harmonies that seemed to come from another world. The ancient Latin words mixed with English phrases, creating a musical bridge between past and present that wrapped around the royal procession like invisible silk. Prince George walked with careful steps behind his parents, his young face serious with concentration. At 10 years old, he understood that he was not just a child attending a family event, but the future King of England, learning how to carry himself in the most formal of royal occasions. His posture was perfect, his expression composed, yet those who knew him well could see the excitement dancing in his eyes. Princess Charlotte followed her brother, her natural grace evident even at her young age. She had inherited her mother's instinct for public appearances, knowing exactly when to smile and how to acknowledge the distinguished guests without breaking the solemnity of the procession. Her dress, a miniature masterpiece of design, complemented her mother's gown while maintaining its own unique charm. Little Prince Louis, the youngest of the family, walked with careful steps that showed his determination to do everything right. His excitement was harder to contain than his siblings, but he had been well prepared for this moment and understood the importance of good behavior during such a significant ceremony. As the royal family moved deeper into the Abbey, they passed beneath arches that had sheltered the greatest moments in British history. These stones had witnessed the coronation of Elizabeth I, the wedding of Queen Victoria, and countless other ceremonies that had shaped the nation. Now they would add another chapter to that incredible story. The altar area came into view, dominated by the ancient coronation chair that had supported British monarchs for over 700 years. The chair itself seemed to radiate power and authority, its wooden frame polished by time and touched by the hands of history. Soon, Charles would take his place upon that throne and become the latest in an unbroken line of kings and queens. Catherine felt her heart beat faster as they approached their designated seats. The front pew had been reserved for the immediate royal family, positioning them perfectly to witness every moment of the ceremony that would transform her father-in-law from prince to king. The view from their seats would be magnificent, allowing them to see not just the ceremony itself, but also the faces of the distinguished guests who had come from around the world to witness this historic moment. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood ready at the altar, his ceremonial robes making him appear like a figure from a medieval painting. In his hands, he held the service book that contained the ancient words that would soon make Charles the King of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. As Catherine and William took their seats, the abbey fell into a reverent silence. The procession was complete, the guests were ready, and the stage was set for one of the most important ceremonies in recent British history. The air itself seemed to shimmer with anticipation as everyone present prepared to witness the moment when a new chapter in the monarchy would begin. The moment arrived with the weight of centuries behind it. As King Charles II took his place upon the ancient coronation chair, Catherine felt tears gathering in her eyes, despite her determination to maintain perfect composure. This was the culmination of a lifetime of preparation, not just for Charles, but for the entire royal family who had supported him on his journey to this sacred throne. The Archbishop of Canterbury began the ancient ceremony with words that had echoed through Westminster Abbey for generations of monarchs. Each phrase carried the power of tradition, while speaking to the hopes of a modern nation ready to embrace the future under new leadership. Catherine listened to every word, understanding that she was hearing the transformation of a man she had known as a father-in-law into the sovereign of multiple nations. Charles looked magnificent in his coronation robes, the rich fabrics and precious stones creating an image of majesty that would be remembered for centuries. Yet Catherine could also see the human being beneath all the ceremony, the man who had waited longer than any heir in British history for this moment to arrive. His face showed both the solemnity appropriate to the occasion and the joy of finally accepting the crown that had always been his destiny. Prince William sat beside Catherine, his hand finding hers during the most emotional moments of the ceremony. She could feel the tension in his grip, understanding that he was watching not just a coronation, but a preview of his own future. One day, perhaps decades from now, he would sit in that same chair while his own son watched from the front pew. The crown jewels appeared as if by magic, carried on cushions of deep purple velvet by officials whose families had performed these same duties for generations. Each piece told a story of power and responsibility, of the weight that comes with wearing symbols that represent millions of people across the Commonwealth. When the St. Edward's crown was lifted high above Charles's head, the entire abbey seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment that would define a new era, the instant when Charles would officially become King Charles II. Catherine watched with wonder as the golden crown, heavy with history and expectation, was slowly lowered onto the head of the man who had prepared his entire life for this single moment. The words "God Save the King" rang out across the abbey, sung by 2,000 voices raised in unison. Catherine joined in the ancient declaration, her clear voice adding to the chorus that officially recognized the new monarch. Around her, she could see tears in the eyes of hardened politicians and military leaders, all of them moved by the profound significance of what they were witnessing. Charles's face transformed as the crown settled upon his head. The prince who had waited so patiently was gone, replaced by a king ready to serve his people with dedication and wisdom. His eyes found his family in the front pew, and Catherine saw a flash of gratitude and love that spoke of the support they had given him throughout his long preparation for this role. Queen Camilla was crowned next, her own transformation equally moving as she accepted the responsibilities that came with being the king's consort. Catherine watched with particular interest, understanding that she was observing her own future role being defined before her eyes. The ceremony continued with ancient rituals that connected the new king to centuries of British tradition. The anointing with holy oil, the presentation of the orb and scepter, the recitation of oaths that bound the monarch to serve his people with honor and justice. Each element of the service had been performed in this same abbey for hundreds of years, yet each felt fresh and meaningful in the context of this particular coronation. Young Prince George watched everything with intense concentration, his young mind absorbing lessons about duty and service that would guide him throughout his life. Catherine was proud of how well all three of her children were behaving, their perfect conduct a testament to their understanding of the importance of this day. The music throughout the ceremony was magnificent, with the abbey's choir supported by some of the world's finest musicians. The voices soared toward the ancient vaulted ceiling, carrying prayers and praises that seemed to lift everyone present closer to the divine. Catherine had always loved church music, but today it felt especially powerful as it provided the soundtrack to this historic transformation. As the ceremony drew toward its conclusion, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. She thought about the years of preparation, the countless official duties, the private moments of doubt, and the public displays of confidence. Everything had led to this abbey, this chair, this crown, and this moment when a new chapter in British history officially began. The final blessing was pronounced over the newly crowned king and queen, and Catherine knew that when they left this abbey, the world would be different. Charles would no longer be the Prince of Wales but the King of the United Kingdom, and William would carry the title that his father had held for over 50 years. The transformation was complete, witnessed by the world, and blessed by tradition. History had been made in the most magnificent way possible, with all the pageantry and dignity that the British monarchy could provide. The newly crowned King Charles II rose from the coronation chair with a dignity that seemed to radiate outward through the entire abbey. The Street Edward's crown sat upon his head as if it had been made specifically for this moment, its ancient gold catching the light that streamed through the stained glass windows. This was no longer the Prince of Wales who had entered the abbey hours earlier, but a king transformed by ceremony and tradition into the sovereign of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. His eyes swept across the congregation, acknowledging the distinguished guests who had traveled from around the world to witness this historic moment. When his gaze reached the front pew where his family sat, Catherine saw a look of profound gratitude mixed with determination. This was a man who understood the weight of the crown he now wore, and was ready to carry that burden with grace and wisdom. Catherine and William rose gracefully from their seats as the recessional began, their movements perfectly synchronized after years of public appearances together. The Princess of Wales felt a surge of pride as she watched her father-in-law begin his walk back down the abbey's nave, no longer as a prince, but as a king. Every step he took was measured and regal, befitting the monarch he had finally become. The organ's magnificent notes filled the ancient building once again, but this time the music carried a different quality. These were not the anticipatory melodies that had welcomed the royal family into the abbey, but triumphant fanfares that celebrated the successful completion of a ceremony that had transformed both a man and a nation. As the royal family processed out of the abbey, Catherine was acutely aware of the historic significance of the moment. She was no longer walking behind the Prince of Wales, but behind the King of England. William, beside her, was now the Prince of Wales, carrying a title that connected him to centuries of Welsh history and tradition. The children following behind them were the grandchildren of a reigning monarch, their own positions in the line of succession suddenly more immediate and real. The procession moved with stately grandeur back down the nave, past the same distinguished guests who had watched the transformation take place. Catherine noticed how the expressions on their faces had changed during the ceremony. They had entered the abbey as witnesses to a formal occasion, but they were leaving as people who had seen history made before their eyes. Queen Camilla walked beside her newly crowned husband with a grace that spoke of her own transformation. She had entered the abbey as the Duchess of Cornwall, but was leaving as the queen consort, ready to support her husband in his new role just as she had supported him as a prince. Catherine felt a special connection to Camilla in this moment, understanding the unique challenges that came with marrying into the royal family and adapting to a life of constant public scrutiny. Prince George maintained his serious expression as they walked, but Catherine could see the excitement in his eyes. Her eldest son had just witnessed the coronation of his grandfather and gained a deeper understanding of his own future role. The ceremony had been both a family celebration and a lesson in the responsibilities that awaited him as the future king. Princess Charlotte walked with the natural grace that seemed to come so easily to her, while Prince Louis concentrated on maintaining the perfect behavior he had shown throughout the long ceremony. Catherine was incredibly proud of how well all three children had conducted themselves, their maturity and composure a testament to their understanding of the importance of the day. As they approached the great doors of Westminster Abbey, Catherine could hear the roar of the crowds waiting outside. The thousands of people who had gathered to celebrate this historic day were ready to welcome their new king and share in the joy of his coronation. The sound grew louder with each step, creating a wall of celebration that seemed to push against the ancient stones of the abbey. The doors opened wide, and sunlight flooded into the building, creating a golden pathway that led from the sacred interior toward the celebrating crowds beyond. This was the moment of transition from the private ceremony to the public celebration, from the ancient traditions within the abbey to the modern nation waiting outside. King Charles II paused at the threshold, allowing the photographers to capture the first images of him as the crowned monarch emerging from his coronation. The crown on his head caught the afternoon sunlight and threw it back in brilliant flashes that seemed to announce his new status to the world. Catherine and William stood beside the new king and queen, their presence representing both support for the current monarch and hope for the future of the monarchy. Together, the royal family created a picture of unity and continuity that would be remembered for generations. The cheers from outside grew even louder as the crowds caught their first glimpse of the newly crowned king. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the culmination of a day that had brought people together from every corner of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth to celebrate their shared heritage and their hope for the future under new leadership. The moment King Charles II stepped out of Westminster Abbey into the bright afternoon sunlight, the roar of the crowd was deafening. Thousands upon thousands of voices rose in celebration, creating a wave of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ancient building behind them. This was no longer the nervous anticipation of the morning, but pure joy at witnessing the successful coronation of their new monarch. Catherine emerged beside her father-in-law, and the crowd's enthusiasm reached new heights. Her gown, which had looked magnificent in the soft light of the abbey, now blazed like captured sunlight in the afternoon brightness. Every crystal and pearl sewn into the ivory silk caught the sun's rays and threw them back in brilliant sparkles that made her appear almost otherworldly. The headpiece that had once graced Princess Diana's head now crowned Catherine with equal magnificence, connecting past and present in a single stunning image. The Princess of Wales raised her hand in the graceful wave that had become her signature, her smile radiant with genuine happiness at the success of the day's ceremonies. She had entered the abbey as the wife of the heir to the throne, but she was leaving as the wife of the Prince of Wales, her own position in the royal hierarchy elevated by the events of the day. Prince William walked beside his wife, resplendent in his military uniform, now carrying the weight of his new title as the Prince of Wales. The medals on his chest seemed to shine more brightly in the afternoon sun, each one representing the service and dedication that had prepared him for this moment. His bearing was that of a man ready for the increased responsibilities that came with being the direct heir to the throne. Their children followed behind, each of them transformed in their own way by the day's events. Prince George, now second in line to the throne with his grandfather's coronation, walked with a new sense of purpose that spoke of his growing understanding of his future role. Princess Charlotte beamed with delight at the celebrating crowds, her natural charm winning hearts wherever she looked. Prince Louis, despite his young age, seemed to understand that this was a very special day. his excitement contained but clearly visible in his bright eyes. The return journey to Buckingham Palace became a victory parade through the heart of London. The same streets that had carried them to Westminster Abbey in nervous anticipation now welcomed them back as witnesses to one of the most successful coronations in recent memory. The crowds lining the route were even larger than they had been in the morning, swelled by people who had watched the ceremony on television and then rushed out to join the celebration. Catherine's carriage moved slowly through the cheering masses, allowing everyone to see the royal family clearly. She noticed elderly people in the crowd wiping tears from their eyes, clearly moved by the emotion of the day. Young children waved enthusiastically from their parents' shoulders, their innocent joy adding to the festive atmosphere that filled the London streets. The procession passed landmarks that had stood for centuries, each one adding to the sense of history and continuity that defined the day. Trafalgar Square was packed with people who had gathered around Nelson's column to watch the royal carriages pass by. The Mall stretched before them like a river of celebration, lined with Union Jack flags that fluttered in the gentle breeze. As Buckingham Palace came into view, Catherine could see that the famous balcony was already prepared for the traditional appearance that would mark the official end of the coronation celebrations. The red-draped balcony looked out over a sea of people who had gathered in front of the palace to welcome their new king home. The carriages drew up to the palace entrance, and the royal family stepped out to the continued cheers of the crowd. Inside the palace, staff members who had worked tirelessly to ensure the day's success lined the corridors to welcome them home. Their faces showed the pride and satisfaction of people who had played their part in a perfectly executed ceremony. But the day was not yet over. The traditional balcony appearance awaited, the moment when the newly crowned king would show himself to his people and accept their congratulations and support. Catherine knew that this would be one of the most photographed moments of the entire day, the image that would appear on front pages around the world as the official portrait of the new reign. As they made their way through the palace toward the balcony, Catherine reflected on the incredible journey of the day. From the quiet morning preparations to the magnificent ceremony in Westminster Abbey to this triumphant return home, every moment had been perfect. The British monarchy had once again demonstrated its ability to create occasions of breathtaking beauty and profound meaning. The balcony doors opened, and the royal family stepped out into the golden afternoon light. Below them spread a sea of faces, all turned upward in celebration and support. King Charles II stood at the center, his crown catching the light as he acknowledged the cheers of his people. Queen Camilla stood beside him, radiant in her own triumph.